Good morning, children. Let's resume with our chapter Henry a Chameleon. As we have earlier done, that how the writer was trying to be friendly with Henry. So let's continue with it. We were on page number 46. He would blow himself up to an enormous size of his lungs filled up with the air while his color changed from green to red. So, in this, the writer is saying that he could blow his lungs and he could blow his lungs with the air, and the color of his body can be changed from green to red. He would sit up on his hind legs, swing means to swing back and forth from side to side, hopping to overawe me. Overawe means to restrain, to be away from me, from the writer. Opening his mouth very wide, he would let out an angry hiss, but his threatening display went no further. He did not bite. So he was Henry is trying to make everybody fearful from him by hissing and by trying to display himself in a threatening way so that everybody should be scared of him. But further, the writer says that later it doesn't happen so far the same as he was trying to do actually, because he did not bite. Henry was a harmless fellow. Harmless means the person or an animal that doesn't harm anyone. And if I put my finger in his mouth, even during his wildest moments, he would simply wait for me to take it out again. I suppose he could bite. His rigid jaws carried a number of finely pointed teeth, but Henry seemed convinced that his teeth were there for sole purpose of chewing food, not the fingers. So he says Henry was a harmless fellow, and if any time the writer put his finger in his mouth for even during his the wildest moments, even during at that time when he is very angry, he would simply wait and let the writer to take out his finger from his mouth. And he thinks writer usually thinks that he could bite, but his rigid jaws, the rigid jaws were having the pointed teeth even. But Henry seemed that he has convinced himself, he has prepared himself that his teeth are just for only one purpose. Soul means only one purpose, just for chewing food, not the fingers. And Henry was sometimes willing to take food from my hands. Then he did very swiftly means very fastly, that sometimes he quickly take food from writer's hand very quickly, and his tongue performed like a boomerang. Have you seen Mowgli? In that, the Mowgli was having a weapon that is a boomerang, right? Whenever Mowgli throws that weapon, it always come back to him. That is a boomerang. All right, so boomerang always come back to him with the food, usually an insect attached to it. So although Henry didn't cause any trouble in our house, so he did create somewhat of a riot is a noise in a nursery down the road. It started out quite innocently. When the papayas in our orchard were ripe, grandmother sent a basketful to her friend Mrs. Ghosh, who was principal of a nursery school. While the basket sat waiting, Henry went searching for the beetles and slipped in among the papayas unnoticed. So he says Henry did not cause any kind of trouble. He keeps on staying at our home only. And when the papayas in our orchard were ripe, grandmother sent the basket full of it to Mrs. Ghosh, who was the principal of the nursery school, while the basket sat basket sat waiting means while the basket was filled and it was supposed to go to Mrs. Ghosh, Henry went into the basket just for searching the beetles. These are that of the insect, and slipped among the papayas, and nobody noticed him that he is sitting in it. So the gardener dutifully carried the basket to the school and left it to Mrs. Ghosh's office. When Mrs. Ghosh returned after making her rounds, she began examining and admiring the papayas, and out popped Henry. So, what happened? This is very some type of comedy, even, and hilarious. It is hilarious as well as threatening, even fearful, even, that the gardener dutifully carried the basket to the school and left it to Mrs. Ghosh's office. And when Mrs. Ghosh came back to her office, and when she started examining and admiring the papayas, what happens? The Henry suddenly popped out. the Henry suddenly came out of the basket. Mrs. Ghosh screamed. Henry squinted up at her, both eyes revolving furiously. Mrs. Ghosh started shouting, and Henry was squinting at her. Mrs. Ghosh screamed again. Henry's color changed from green to yellow to red. He started changing his colors. His mouth opened as though he too would like scream. His mouth was also open, and it was like that he was going to scream. An assistant teacher also took one look at Chameleon and joined in shrieking. Shrieking means in the loud noise. That teacher started shouting. Henry was terrified. Henry got frightened even. He fled from the office, running down the corridor into one of the classroom. He quickly went out of the office, then went into the corridor, and then went into the classrooms. Then he climbed up on a desk while child ran in all directions. Some to get away from Henry, some wanted to catch him, and Henry finally made the exit through the window and disappeared in the garden. Finally, he got one window from where he could jumped out and disappeared in the garden. As a chameleon, he can change his color. So grandmother heard about the incident, but she never mentioned Mrs. Ghosh that chameleon was their own pet, and because she thought it might spoil their friendship. So grandfather and I didn't think Henry would find his way back to us, that he will ever come back to them, because the school was 3 blocks away. It was 3 buildings more away. But a few days later, I found him sunning himself on the garden wall. But few days later, again the Henry was sunning on the garden wall. Although he looked none of the worse for his adventures. None of the worse means he was okay, he was alright. He never went abroad. Abroad means just to go out of the garden only. Henry spent the rest of his days in the garden only, where he kept the insect population well within bounds. Insect population well within bound means that he never let the insects to raise their population. He keeps on eating them. That's all with the story, and I hope you have liked it. The Henry is a chameleon who seems to be very fearful, but in the story, the writer has tried to prove that Henry can also be, chameleon can also be kept as a pet at a home, and only the looks of chameleon are frightening, but in actual, it's not that threatful. All right, I hope you have enjoyed it. Please go through it by yourself, and then we'll discuss its exercises later. Thank you.